What do you think we need to be thinking about when we look at the idea of aging?
First and foremost, education. Education. I have on my website, change your life, not just your symptoms. Live longer and live better. For me, it's not just about, diagnosis. It's also about quality of life. What is the point of making it to 90 or 95 or 100? And then you're dependent on 15 different medications with all kinds of different side effects and all this kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Glennis Woods Mullins, and I love to help women to vibe, to be more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered in midlife. So come on, let's vibe. Midlife is always the topic that we talk about, and we try to approach it in different ways because there's just so much that happens during this particular time in life. And one of the things I think that's going on right now is just a sense of overwhelm in the wellness industry. There's so many different things now. In fact, it's a friend of mine just the other day, and I know she was, trying to be positive and sharing. She did a posting on social media of her medical team, her nutritionist, her holistic practitioner, her surgeon, her orthopedic person, her fitness person. I think she had about 6 people whose pictures she took, and they said, "This is my team." And I thought, wow, that's great. But I also thought someone's going to read this and think, oh my God. First of all, I can't afford that. Second of all, do I really need to do that? And so it really brings to mind, what is it that you need and what kinds of things do you need to be considering? Well, we're going to ask Angel Shannon to help us with this because she specializes in lifetime medicine. She is an MSc and is a personal development keynote speaker and board certified nurse practitioner. And she's also founder of Siva Health and the Siva Institute. And she loves to do presentations and talk to women about ways that they can integrate their healthcare and focus on the mind, body, spirit approach, and basically focus on what's going on in their lifestyle, what things they need to tweak in their lifestyle to be healthy. So I thought she'd be a good person to talk about all these different things that are going on that we do and all our options and help us make some decisions on what we really need. Angel, thank you so much for being on the V.I.B.E Living podcast. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Linus, thank you so very much for the invitation. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to have this conversation.
Well, thank you. It was just a coincidence that yesterday I happened to be on and I saw my friend post all these. And my first thought was like, wow, I mean, I have access to those people, but they're not necessarily on my team. I just have my one integrative doc. And if something comes up, then I'll get somebody else. But I think it's great, though, that she has people looking after her. But what is it that we really need in midlife? Because our bodies are going through so much transition. And when we're talking about lifestyle medicine, what is that? And what's the difference between lifestyle medicine and maybe what I might get at my integrative doc or my OBGYN?
Oh my gosh, these are such wonderful questions. And I want to dive right in. First and foremost, kudos to you for, being so adept with all of these different terms because they are used interchangeably, sometimes to a fault. So I would like to make some clarifications on that first. The other thing is being so keen to integrative medicine. Let's just dive in right there because integrative isn't a specialty. You don't go to school and get a degree in being integrative. Integrative is more of an approach. It's how you approach the patient or the client in front of you. Integrative just means that you are going to, what I say is marry the best of Western medicine with the best of the Eastern approaches. So we're talking and lifestyle approaches. So what does that mean? That means that if there is something clinically allopathic that we need to treat allopathically, a disease state, we're not going to not work that up. We're going to do all of the things. Let's just say there's a breast lump or there's a something that we could think could be cancerous. Of course, we're going to use allopathic methods to do blood work, to do screenings, to do all of the things that we know are evidence-based science. But then when we get to making the specific diagnosis, Then we get to talk about how are we going to treat this? Are we going to treat this with surgery? Are we going to provide some acupuncture for pain relief? Are we going to use supplements to boost the immune system and help the immune system as we undergo radiation or other therapies? So integrative just means that we're going to marry different modalities together so that we help the body heal itself. Right. So we're never going to divorce ourselves from what we know is good, solid clinical science. But at the same time, we're not just going to take the approach that pills and surgery, pills and surgery, pills and surgery. We know that there are so many different ways for healing to happen in each individual. And that's the other thing about integrative medicine. It's all about understanding the patient, the individual in front of you. What are their religious practices, their religious beliefs, their spiritual beliefs? What is their lifestyle like? What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other person. Yoga is not for everybody all the time. Some people are just not keen to doing those types of stretches and practices and will benefit more from Pilates. Everyone doesn't need to do meditation. I used to say, oh, you should meditate, until I got really deep in the mental health world and realized that meditation is very difficult for some people, especially sitting meditation. So it's all about understanding, first and foremost, the person in front of you, realizing that this is a whole person and you have to take a whole person approach to managing their care, optimizing wellness and health, and not always being focused on disease. That really, to me, is the art of true medicine and the holistic integrative approach. And there are lots and lots of practitioners out here who take that approach, but don't necessarily have a degree per se in integrative medicine or some of the other buzzwords that are being used these days. Now,
Yeah. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go right ahead, Angel. Go ahead.
Yes. And to your point about lifestyle medicine, yes, that is a more popular subspecialty. I think first identified by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, of which I'm a proud member. And basically, what they really do, focus on and get clinical providers to really hone in on is the 6 key pillars of good health, which again falls under that integrative approach as well, which is, stay moving, plant-based diet, primarily plant-based if you can, sleep, stress relief, stress management, avoiding toxic substances or substances that we know are harmful or carcinogens, things like this. So they have a 6-pillar framework that really is in keeping with much of what I'm sure most good integrative providers focus on as well.
It's interesting because when you talk about integrative, just within the last few years, because I've been doing this for about 17 years and I've worked with a lot of different doctors, and some of them I've known for that whole time. And it's interesting how they began to change what they call their practice. And many of them have moved to integrative. And it is because, and also many of them are not working for traditional HMOs or PPOs or managed care, because it's hard to be integrative and work within that system because of the time constraints and the protocols and all that. And I know what I'm talking about, not because I'm a doctor, but in another life, I was in charge of physician recruitment for an HMO and was involved in all of the administrative meetings with the hospital administrators and the head docs and all that kind of stuff. And back then, which was about 18 years ago, there was this big struggle about trying to figure out how to incorporate that. But there was also another disconnect with that because integrative's focus is really finding a solution based upon causation and not symptoms. And Western medicine is really about trying to find a way to get rid of the symptoms, but not necessarily causation. Causation might take more time. Also, if you get to causation, the idea of butts in beds, it changes. And which is one of the reasons why I decided to leave, because there was a real disconnect there,
Absolutely.
in terms of healing. So when it comes to working with women, what kinds of things do you do from a lifestyle perspective? What kind of questions do you ask them to kind of get to the root cause of some of the things that might be going on as a result of being a lifestyle practitioner?
Yes, very great question. And thank you for sharing your background. I celebrated my 31st year in clinical practice. Started out in ICU and trauma here in Baltimore, and I'm originally from New York. So I know exactly what you're talking about with restructuring. And this industry has changed many times over. And you're absolutely right that many integrative practitioners have had to really come out of those HMOs and insurance based services, service frameworks, because it's very difficult to diagnose and treat someone in 15 minutes. Most of us need a whole lot more time. The practice that I worked in when I first became a nurse practitioner, we were upwards of 24 patients a day. That's a lot of people to try to see and treat well. So my background is, as I said, ICU trauma, worked in a major research institution here in Baltimore, seen a lot, learned a lot, know a lot, and I know exactly what you're talking about. What do I focus on in with my female population? First and foremost, education. Education, I have on my website, change your life, not just your symptoms. Live longer and live better. For me, it's not just about, diagnosis. It's also about quality of life. What is the point of making it to 90 or 95 or 100, and then you're dependent on 15 different medications with all kinds of different side effects and all this kind of thing? So on my website, I make it clear what our core values are: trust, transparency, and empowerment. And there's no better way to be empowered but through education. So I really like to hone in on and ask my female patients, what do you already know? Where do you feel like your gaps are, your gaps in learning? What do you feel like you just need some fine tuning in? I don't like to make the assumption that I'm the authority, because I really am not. You're the person who knows yourself better than anyone. You know what you need to know, and you know what you don't know. So my role really is to be a partner in health. I'm not the expert. I'm the person who's going to hold your hand, and we're going to find the information we need for you. So I start there. And I always like to understand who's already on your team, so to speak. As you mentioned about the person's post about who's on their team, well, depending on what they've got going on in their life, they may need those folks. But I think that understanding what you need and when, and knowing, as you mentioned, that you have access to those people when you need them, not necessarily checking in with them all the time, but knowing that if I need that service is there, is the kind of approach I like to take. So when I ask questions, I often ask, who's on your team? Do you already have at least the folks we need to do your baseline screenings? Your well woman care. Do you have someone that you're seeing for that? Do you have someone who's doing your GI care in the African American population? And we know the numbers and the data on colon cancers and things like this. Do you have someone who's doing those screenings? Because those screenings are really important. So I like to make sure that all of the bases are covered before we start talking about alternatives and sort of going off the beaten path with other things. Let's make sure we have the framework that your foundational needs are being taken care of. Labs are being done. Screening labs are being done. Let's not talk about gut health until we know whether you're anemic or not, because anemia can, turn into heart disease into a heart attack. More women die of heart disease in the United States than any of the cancers.
That's right. That's the number one killer.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I like to make sure that screenings are done, team or framework is in place, and that we cover the foundational bases first and foremost, and that we create a plan for that. Not just doing that this year and then we're 3 years late on the mammogram or 5 years late on the colon screenings. Like, we get a specific plan of care that is personalized for each individual based on where they are in life and, and what they should be looking at.
And that makes so much sense. But, many times people aren't even sure the questions to ask. In
Mhm.
fact, many, if you're like in my age group, I'm 67, I grew up that you go to the doctor's office and you might tell him the symptoms or whatever. Basically, he's basically telling you things, you're just listening. Over the years, that began to change. My mom became more of an advocate, and she would go in there with a pad and say, "This is what's going on, and this is what I think is needed," because of some experiences that she had with the doctors minimizing the pain threshold or minimizing the symptoms or whatever. And so it taught me the importance of advocacy, of, really letting the doctor know. And I always say to my clients, if you're asking questions to doctors and they're getting a little hot under the collar behind it, then maybe you might want to consider getting another doctor.
Exactly.
Because we're supposed to ask questions. These are our bodies, our temples, the only ones that we have. And if we
Mhm.
have a concern or something that we don't understand, you will not be able to do it, except for, as you mentioned earlier, education.
Yes.
So, given that, when it comes to education, what kinds of things do women, in particular, women in the midlife range, what kinds of questions do they need to be asking their doctors? What kinds of things should they be advocating for?
I absolutely love that you brought this up. And I love your mom for, having a little notepad and writing things down because you have to take notes. You have to be your own best advocate. And especially when you're in the insurance-based, services where time is limited and whatnot, and you don't want any errors. You don't want to say something and, oh, I'm on such and such medication. And no, that's not what you're actually taking. So you're absolutely right about that. I think the number one questions to ask any provider are what are the evidence-based screenings that I should be having at this age or stage in my life. You know, and the best thing about where we are now, you can Google this all day long. Now, I'm not talking about Google as in, reading someone or listening to someone's TikTok or someone else's YouTube videos. I'm talking about Googling the associations like the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, American Association of Clinical Gynecologists, the American Cardiology Association. Always find what the clinical guidelines are that govern that particular specialty. So I say to ladies, sign up for these newsletters, AARP, which is there's a really wonderful subset under AARP specifically for women of color that really focuses on what those screenings should be. I absolutely love AARP magazine. I was excited when I got my card. I signed up very, I wasn't even turning 50. I guess the age is 50 maybe, but I signed up for it before I was even 50. So get yourself in the flow of information. Don't just rely on asking the doctor, but start branching out a little bit and go to organizations that readily have these newsletters, are putting them out weekly, even if it takes creating a separate email address where you just get all of your health information coming into that email. Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, and start like really creating a library for yourself and start with the first and foremost question. I am 55, 54, 50, whatever. What are the screenings that I should be having? What are the tests that I should be having? And go an extra step and ask why. What would we be looking for in getting this screening? Linus, you'd be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't. I want to make any assumptions, but the number of women who aren't getting EKGs, who aren't getting
Mm,
echocardiograms. According
mm,
to the American Cardiology Association, once you have the diagnosis of hypertension, you should be
mm.
getting a 2D echocardiogram every 2 years. I believe that's what the last time I read it once a year, my ladies get them, but at least every 2 years and at least a screening EKG. I teach all over the country, and I tell you, the number of women who have hypertension who have
Mhm.
never had an echocardiogram or an EKG blows
I
my
think
mind.
that's probably pretty common because I would bet you when it comes to managed care and HMOs, it's not part of the protocol unless there's an event or something close to an event. Usually what happens in managed care is that it almost takes an event to
Mhm.
start getting these. And I don't think we always do the best in our traditional medical care when it comes to preventive medicine because they don't talk a whole lot about nutrition. And I have a friend who got really upset with me the other day because she was saying that I thought that I was saying that physicians aren't well educated or qualified. And I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they can only learn so much, and nutrition is not part of their specialization. I mean,
Exactly.
what they get maybe the equivalent of a couple of semesters or something like
Mhm.
that, or a few hours of nutrition. That does not make a nutritionist.
That is a fact. Right.
That's a fact. I mean,
That's
it's
a
not a
fact.
criticism, it's a fact. And but I think it's something that we as potential patients need to know, so that
Mhm.
if we have something that is driven by basically what we're putting in our mouth, then we
Mhm.
know we need to talk with someone who is qualified in that area to help us
Mhm.
with, our healthy eating and doing the things
Mhm.
that are necessary to make a difference in our outcomes when we're taking
Absolutely.
these tests. The other thing I've noticed with the traditional medicine is, as you said, they don't have a tendency not to take into consideration the whole body for many, many reasons, but basically because that's not how they're trained. But there's
Mhm.
so many other factors other than what's going on with the body in terms of spiritually, environmentally.
Mhm.
Our relationships make a
Mhm.
difference, the amount of stress that you're under. I think what was really interesting this last a couple of years is what happened when the pandemic came, because I think it was very, very telling in
Mhm.
terms of how unhealthy we really were. Not to say that we would not have gotten COVID, but perhaps how our bodies reacted to it would not have been the same, because, quite frankly, many of us have a compromised immune system and don't
Mhm.
even know it and don't know how to fortify it. And it really doesn't take that much effort, but it does take education. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, as we're approaching the flu season, which seems to be year
Mhm.
round now, what kinds of things can we do as midlife women, especially, to fortify our immune system?
Great question. And I want to say one thing to your point about allopathic practitioners in their defense. And that is they can't know everything.
No.
But what I think is important is to know what you don't know and be able to refer. There are lots of different, one thing I love about where I live here in Maryland is I'm just surrounded by a lot of really, really good practitioners, physicians, surgeons. We refer a lot to our partners because that person can go deeper. Every person who rules in as a pre-diabetic for me automatically gets in diabetes education. So I think understanding what your lane is and being willing to refer out is really important. The other thing is, on the consumer end, as healthcare consumers, we really have to start thinking above and beyond the frameworks of the HMO that you mentioned. Absolutely. Many of them are rooted in cost containment, and it does take an event, but there's nothing preventing us from paying for services on our own. And just as tires are not covered with your insurance policy, oil changes are not covered with your insurance policy, you wouldn't dream of driving that Mercedes Benz or that Audi out of the lot without getting those oil changes. So we as consumers have to, I'll say it plain, we've got to step it up a notch, and we've got to see that we make the investment in our health and well-being a priority, even if it means setting aside, I'm old enough to remember vacation savings clubs. I get my patients to say, hey, listen, I'm going to tuck away $50 a month or $100 or what have you, so that when the time comes that I have to see a practitioner that my insurance is not going to pay for, I'm not, saying I can't do that because the insurance doesn't pay for that. So I really try to drive my clients, and even my clients who I'm just a consultant to, I try to remind them that set these funds aside, so that when we get down into the functional medicine stuff that is clearly not going to be paid by insurance, you're not trying to figure out how to pay for these very necessary steps. To your point about immune health, neuroimmune well-being and endocrine well-being is my sweet spot, and that is definitely my lane. And I say, before we even talk about supplements and food and all these other things, stress management, stress control, stress management, activating this parasympathetic nervous system, this relaxation response, is the number one thing that I am promoting in my patient population. We've got to rein in this stress, because what is cancer? Cancer is just one cell that doubles and triples and quadruples into a thing, a mass, a solid mass, or a liquid, thing, blood cancers and things like this. So reining in this stress is just such a major, it's so important. It's so important to immune health. And what do I mean by stress? I mean going to sleep at night, shutting down these devices, turning off these phones, and literally giving your body that chance to reset. There's a lot that goes on in your immune system while you are sleeping in your brain. Your brain is actually, through the glial cells in the brain, sweeping out debris, getting rid of trash. Your interleukins, all those white blood cells, all that stuff is being regulated while you're sleeping. So sleep is good medicine. We're often talking too much about supplements, and believe you me, I am a supplement believer. But we've got to do the simple things. We've got to get those foundational things in place. And a lot of women are really in sympathetic fight, flight, fright mode.
Oh yes,
The time.
that's how I got into doing what I do, is that I suffered from an anxiety disorder. I was diagnosed about 20 years ago, and I took a year sabbatical under the auspices of going back to school and getting another master's. But actually, what I did was I started taking classes. And that's kind of how I found out about the mind, body, spirit world. And I made a decision that I just wasn't going to go back, because I wasn't going to put myself back and in that situation to help cause it. And I learned about the concept of chronic stress. So so glad to hear you say this, because what I didn't say, but I was thinking I was going to say it later, depending on what you said, was that one of the reasons I think that we responded the way we did to the virus COVID was because of compromised immune systems,
Yes.
based upon the pace within which we live our lives.
Yes.
Not getting enough sleep, not shutting all the way down. Of course, not eating properly, not moving enough, being glued to computers, multiple priorities of everything else but ourselves, basically
Yes.
putting ourselves so far on the back burner that even when we do take time to reach back there to try to pull us back, can't find ourselves. And the other
Exactly.
thing was about that you mentioned that I really do agree with is how we set our priorities. I mean, we will go and spend $400 on a pair of shoes and $1,000 on a bag, even make payment arrangements for this bag, but get upset when a health coach, charges you $200 an hour, whatever it is, or you go to see someone like yourself. And it's about the priorities. It's not so much what you look like. I say this all the time. It's about what your health is like. A healthy person can, be very, very thin, but who knows what the heck is going on the inside. And we are such a visceral society that is preoccupied with, the surface of what we look, that the insides we've kind of let go of. And
Yes.
that's why someone like you is so important. So I'm so glad that you mentioned chronic stress, because that is a killer.
Yes.
Especially in our community. Now, my listeners are, from all over the world, but everybody knows I'm African American. So I'm going to talk to you sisters for a minute. For those of you who listen to me, this is a real thing.
It is.
And because
It is.
of our history of hypertension and obesity and the number one killer, heart disease, adding chronic stress to your list is not something that you want to do. And it can be prevented, right? It can be prevented.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point about sabbatical, I mean, you and I could probably talk all day long. Some people would say, well, everyone can't afford to take off, for a year or a month or 2 weeks or what have you. I've had that pushback. And what I do say is just ask yourself if you can afford to be on disability. You'd be surprised how minuscule disability payments really are. Can you afford to be off for a month for an illness, for an emergency surgery, for a heart attack? Again, it's planning, it's priorities. I'm not saying to, don't pay your bills in the name of taking a sabbatical, but what I am saying is bet on the inevitable, not the impossible. The inevitable is you are getting older. You are going to get older. What's the alternative? We should be happy about getting older. And just say, how long can you keep working these 2 jobs or 3 jobs or the grind and hustle and grind? Bet on the inevitable, not the impossible. The inevitable day is coming when you won't be able to work at that pace anymore. There is going to be an illness of some kind, just like that car. You drive that Audi's my favorite, you drive that
Mhm.
Audi out of the lot. Surely you're going to need tires at some point.
Right. It's not going to go forever.
Right.
Yeah. And I always like to tell my clients either pay for it on the front end or the back end. And
Exactly.
the back end is usually you in a casket, and it's not really, it might be your insurance or somebody paying for it, but your family is paying for it in more
Exactly.
ways than just monetarily. And that's not to
Exactly.
say that the things that you tell your patients are going to keep them from dying, but it's
Right.
all about how we age. Aging
Yes.
does not mean that you have to be sick the whole time. My
Exactly.
hope for all of us is that we, sit down to watch our favorite program and just kind of slip up instead of being connected to all kinds of tubes and stuff, not knowing our name and out of our minds. My
Exactly.
goal at my age is to continue to be able to play with my six grandchildren, with one on the way for years and years to come, to be able to get down on the floor and be able to push myself back up because I have enough core strength and upper body strength to do that. To be able to know when to relax and not feel bad about taking naps at this stage of the game, and to do the things that support a healthy lifestyle so that you can age in a healthy way.
Yes.
I don't like the messaging that comes behind the whole idea of anti-aging,
Oh,
because to
yeah.
me that means like anti-life. I mean, it's a part of life. It's
The
not
part
it's
of
not a
life.
bad thing. It's a part of life.
Exactly.
It doesn't have
Exactly.
to be, what's going to happen at the end of your destination. We all know that we're going to die.
Mhm.
But it's the journey that we're talking about that you're
It's the
taking.
journey. It's the journey. And it's about living longer, living better, the quality of life, and all of the things that you mentioned time with my grandchildren, get down on the floor, not straining and stressing, and all those things. And everything that you've spoken about today that we've shared is just money in the bank. It's literally like just putting that walk that you take for 30 minutes. Don't worry about whether you've lost weight. Don't agonize over, how many pounds. Just know that this is money in the bank for your
Yeah,
future.
absolutely. I
It's
love the way you say that, Money. That you're absolutely right. I didn't take. I have this whole morning ritual that I do, that I started doing when I took that sabbatical. And one of the first things I did was change my mornings, because my mornings were basically sit straight up and then I'm just going till 7 o'clock at night,
Mm-hmm.
literally in my heels and my suit, the whole thing. Drop the
Yes.
briefcase, run to the, and I have four little girls, all very close in age. My husband was there and he helped as much as he could, but as they got older, it was less because they were girls. So they were all,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
when I took that sabbatical, one of the first things I decided to take back was
Mm-hmm.
my mornings. And my
Absolutely.
girls were still at home, but I just had to say, hey, look, you know what? You're old enough to do this, this, and this, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be doing this, this, and this in the mornings. Because that's when that hamster wheel stress would start.
Yeah.
I had four girls. They were close in age, but they all went to different schools based upon
Mm-hmm.
what their particular talents, gifts, and abilities and interests were. I was that kind of mom. Looking back,
Mm-hmm.
going to the same school would have been just fine. Because they
Right.
ended up doing things that had nothing to do with their
To do
interests
with
at
the
that time,
schools.
right? But that was the thing, and so that's what I did. That's one of the reasons why I was crazy, and
Right.
lived in a van. To this
Mm-hmm.
day, once I stopped working, I stopped driving as much,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
drove for 30 years in a
Yes.
van. And
Oh,
you know how stressful that is?
tell me about it.
Yeah.
Going in two
And
different directions. Listen, I know exactly
absolutely.
what you are talking about. Been
One
there and done.
done that. One of the first
Yes.
cell users on the phone. I've had a cell phone since 1990 or something
Oh
like that. When it
yeah.
was a big old
Mm-hmm. Oh
case,
yeah. Uh-huh. The
on
case.
the phone then. And laptop next to my bed at night,
Yes.
back in the
Yes.
90s. And
Yes.
it took its toll. It took its
It
toll.
took its toll.
And
Yes.
I decided to save my life rather than save my job.
Yes.
you know,
You know
and I
what?
created
Awesome.
something around saving my life. And,
Mhm.
17 years later, I'm still here.
There
And
you are.
Angel, it is so wonderful to meet you and to talk with you and
Thank
the
you.
expertise. And I just want everybody to know, first of all, you need to go to her website and take a look at her services. And I don't think there's one listener out there that could not benefit from the things that she does because we really do need that team when necessary. But it's wonderful to have someone that has the kind of background that she has, where she has a traditional medical background, but she also has the other background that understands the mind body connection, the importance of empowerment and mindfulness. Those are all the alternative ways to be well. Those are all very important. And I am so glad that you're here. And thank you so much for spending
You.
time with us on the Vibe Living podcast.
Thank you so much, Linus. I've learned so much and I feel so fortified by this conversation.
Oh, me too. Always, always. And I hope you have too. We just scratched the surface. So we got to have Angel back, right? You've got to have her back because I have so many more questions. But definitely go ahead and schedule a consult with her to find out more about how she might be able to help you with some of those things that have been niggling at the base of your skull that you just haven't talked to anyone about, that you know you need to deal with it, girlfriends. You know that because it's all about the vibe. Being more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered. And we don't get there all the time just on our own. Sometimes we need some help. We always need help. And that's why I love talking with all of you. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you will share it with someone and definitely like and subscribe. And if you want more information on ways to be well and to be vibrant, please check out my brand new membership program, the V.I.B.E Wellness Woman Network. I have with me 16 or maybe now 17 contributors who represent 300 years of wellness and health experience from a holistic integrative modality for women over 40. So check it out. We've got blogs there. My podcast is there. We have classes, workshops almost every day that are free. And just go ahead and check it out. That's vibewellnesswoman.com. The link is there along with all of Angel's wonderful information. Angel, again, thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a fantastic day, everybody. And don't forget the vibe. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Vibe Living Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and share this podcast. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody.